Welcome to Voices in the Wilderness, conversations about church and leader health. Thank you so much for listening. We encourage you to keep the conversation going. Voices in the Wilderness is brought to you by Preparing for Amazement Ministries, where we empower and equip churches and leaders to create lasting and transformational health. Visit amazed15.org. We also welcome any comments or suggestions. Simply email us at podcast@amazed15.org. My name is Marcus Carlson, and today our guests are Jen Benford and Joe Oliver. Welcome, Jen and Joe.
Hey.
Hello. Hi, friends.
Well, here we go, kind of round I don't know what. We've been doing this series
Yeah.
on the habits of healthy leaders, and so we're kind of finally diving in to the habits. And so today we're on habit 4. Healthy leaders have high self-knowledge. This is one for me that I find very important and get pretty passionate about. And so excited to talk together, the three of us, about that today.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. So for you two, what role has self-knowledge played in your leadership, good or bad?
Well, let's define it.
Sure. Go for it.
What do
Who
we
wants to
what do we
start?
say? Well, what are we saying when we say self-knowledge? Are we talking about educational pursuits? Are we talking about emotional awareness? What are we when we say self-knowledge? Let's define our terms. I'm curious what Jen thinks. And you,
Oh,
Marcus.
yeah. For self-knowledge, I would think would be an awareness of patterns of behaviors, patterns of insecurities or triggers, or awareness of tendencies and the way that we're wired, our needs, awareness of our needs, awareness of how we prefer to be engaged with and how we respond, or even say like awareness of my attachment cycle or style, or my awareness of my Enneagram type, awareness of my strengths. Because the more I am aware, I can filter whether or not what I'm expecting from other people is coming out of my preferences, from what I need or what I think or what I, from my own perspective lenses, or if it's, maybe that's what part of it is, my perspective lenses as well, because you would jump to assumptions based on your own beliefs and convictions and how you understand the narrative of the Bible, for example. So I would
Yeah.
say awareness of your autopilot, I guess.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really knowing who you are and who God created you to be. And I think there's lots of layers to that, right? Knowing how your family of origin has shaped you, knowing how your education and experiences and relationships have shaped you, knowing your personality. Again, I think of things like, the Enneagram, right? I like that the best because it's about what's happening on the inside. Knowing kind of, Jen talked about autopilots, right? But kind of the things that trigger you, the things that frustrate you. A lot of times when we talk with leaders, it's like, what are your blind spots, right? So I think part of self-knowledge is, being aware of and knowing your blind spots, right? Knowing your culture and context, right? That, like, no matter what, I am a pasty white man, that grew up, not in poverty, but not in great wealth. Like, well, how does that, knowing that, what does that tell me, about myself? So I think it's all of those layers. I think it's a huge list. It is about inherently who you are and in your personality. Obviously, I think it is about who God's created to be, but what are the things along the way that have shaped you? And not necessarily, I think we want to place value judgment on those. Oh, that's bad, that's good, instead of like, okay, this is. And so what are the things about this that can be leveraged for good, and what are the things that can be leveraged for bad? So that's how I would describe it, I guess.
Yeah, I think as I reflected on this conversation today, I thought of all the different lists that you all have already, put out there. And then I began to say, okay, I'm not sure like that's so exhaustive. It's it's a lifelong process. So I was thinking of church leaders, and my experience is that in most churches, a self knowledge when it comes to leadership development has always been a track inside pastoral development. I mean, it started back with me in 2001 with John Maxwell,
Mm.
Developing the Leader Within You, right? So that was a formative book for me to start this journey on self knowledge of how I am as a leader. And so my experience is that I'm thinking to myself, we're talking about church leadership. And when we think of like Enneagrams or the DISC or, Myers Briggs or whatever these resources are, those seem to be in abundance in most situations. That these types of things are on the regular. So I got to think, okay, what are the things that I think church leaders in self-knowledge struggle with the most? And the thought that came to me was something that I experienced in business in the mid 2000s. It was a huge kind of buzzword. And it was all about this concept of emotional intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
which is centered in an ability to go like, how am I self-regulating my emotions? Jen talks about that quite a bit. What does it look like for me to have empathy, my social skills with people, where you have leaders that are in positions that, they might have a high degree of like that. I understand I'm a type D or type A or I'm a challenger, and they like lean into this, but they neglect the like emotional intelligence that needs to be paired with that. And so I don't know, for me, like in this conversation, I that's where my brain went when it's
No,
like, okay,
I
what
think that's true. Self knowledge has to be a part of. Uh, I mean, emotional intelligence has to be a part of self knowledge. There's no question. I just don't think it's the entirety of it, right? Because I
no.
do think that there are other things like personality and the created kind of order, right? Like of who God has made you to be that are part of that. But for sure, I think that without emotional intelligence, there's a real limit to self knowledge. Absolutely,
So let me ask this question. I know I'm diving right in.
it's
I'll ask
great.
this question. Um, so again, all I have is to draw from my experiences. When I talk to people and I think about my own experience, who has God created me to be? There was a time in my life that answer was to be a pastor. And I wonder how unhelpful that is. Like, is that really who God created me to be? Or is that a vocation I've chosen to honor God in my giftings? And so like, how do we how do we get better language for church leaders around the idea of who God created you to be? It's easy for churches pastors to tell other people like, oh God, how do we self-identify? And is what I've experienced, people always saying like, well, God created me to be a pastor, or I'm a shepherd. And it's like, okay, but is that? And is that
Just a
forever?
slice. Like, isn't that just a slice? Like, even if our vocation is a calling, which it should be, whether you're a pastor or not, like, isn't that just a slice that, even, when it's like, and I think that's a very American thing. We define ourselves kind of by our job, and that's not as profound in other cultures, right? But if that's really who I was created to be, wouldn't I be created more to be a husband and a father? And but then again, if we limit it, my response is, if we limit it to kind of our roles, especially our vocation, I think we're missing a huge part of it. That a lot of times with pastors, I have to remind them that the gospel is actually for them too, and that they're
Mhm.
actually a child of God, that our primary identity is not our name or our degrees or our vocation, but it's child of God. And so I think there's some fundamental things that are like, okay, we share this identity, all of us, and then there's kind of the unique identities. I mean, Jim, what are your thoughts on this? I don't want to, leave you out as we kind of go back and forth about this.
No, I love this. And I do feel like there is a ceiling of self awareness if you don't have emotional maturity. And it's who am I as a whole person, really, when we're talking about awareness of just how we see the world and how you engage with other people and how you live out really your vocation as a leader. So, yeah, that's just kind of where my brain is going, that it maybe emotional awareness isn't the only facet of it, but it's a critical piece of it, because without it, you don't actually have the capacity to be aware beyond. And you have greater capacity to cause harm when you aren't emotionally aware.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you talk about ceilings. Like I love talking about ceilings with self-knowledge. I've argued that your self-knowledge is your ceiling of growth for growth and effectiveness. That you want to grow and you want to raise your effectiveness, you got to raise kind of that ceiling of self-knowledge. But I think you kind of add an extra layer to this, that you can't raise your ceiling of self-knowledge if you don't have the emotional maturity to do that work or do that reflection, right? And so
Yeah, so I have an analogy for you. So,
I'm ready.
say I had on my wrist a rubber band versus like a bracelet that's made out of thread. So, one has pull in it and one does not, right? So, if you are so rigid in where you are, and I like the bracelet that's thread and there's no give, you actually don't have capacity to grow and mature. But if your posture is more flexible, and I know people like this who have led, and yeah, again, it's a ceiling, and part of it is your teachability. Maybe a huge piece of this is your ability to be teachable, and so your level of humility. I don't know, maybe is there a barometer of humility? I've never.
It's if only, if only. Well, and I think you're right, but I think it goes deeper than that, because I think you can be teachable, but also be resistant to self knowledge. I think early on in my career, I was very teachable to my performance and very teachable to theology and very teachable to those things, but I didn't have the capacity or the courage or the strength to be teachable, to look, like deeper into who I was. And so then I was always my own worst enemy.
So I think like in that I think there's something interesting because I imagine someone listening to this, how does one get to a point where they can actually acknowledge these things that we're talking about? Because most people are gonna be like, oh no, I'm good, or like it's a them problem, it's not a me problem, I've been doing this for years or whatever. And how does one get to a point where we are open, like what are the behaviors, the practical practices that caused you, Marcus, to move from one posture to another in this area? Or have you not moved? I don't know, but I think all of us have grown. But what was that thing that broke the barrier? Was it trauma? Was it broken relationship that made us go, oh my goodness, I think I'm missing it? Because that's the thing that I think, how do we help people with that?
Yeah, I think for me, historically, it's quite frequently attached to some sort of failure.
Hmm.
That's just my personal experience. I wouldn't say that that necessarily has to be true, for everyone. I do think there is also this issue of exposure. Like, emotional intelligence has been celebrated in the business world for a long time, although I'm not sure we moved the needle a ton. But I'm not sure it's even considered in a lot of church or religious world. And that's weird to me, because, I'm in the church I'm helping right now. We're preaching through Romans, and I've got Romans 12, and I was working on my sermon just before we recorded. And, not to like date or time when we're doing this recording. And, it's that whole thing that Paul does of, first off, he starts with the therefore, like, which for him is like, wake the hell up. And, you know, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I think, we're resistant to that in the Christian world more than other places. And I think some of that's fear. I think some of that's like, well, God doesn't change. So we have everything we need in the scripture. So why would there be anything new? But that assumes that we've all arrived. And then I think that, so some of this is well intentioned, maybe, but, I think in this world that, in this church world, that's not, it's not something that's valued. But at the end of the day, as I work with pastors and churches and leaders, especially as they come in after crisis, it's like this person's demise and the destruction that they caused really comes from a complete lack of self-awareness, right? That like I've followed pastors where they had to be removed, and even the denomination's like, you've got blind spots, and they're like, nah, I don't. And it's like that no one can say that, no matter how developed you are or aren't, or how much your self-knowledge has come forward or not. And I think a lot of my mistakes, especially early on in ministry, was just from not recognizing my own insecurities and how I reacted to those insecurities. Like I could have saved myself mountains of trouble, not just for me, but for churches and organizations and for people I cared about. And it's just, but I grew up in a German household, and you had two emotions, angry and none. And so it's like, how do you do that work, um when you grow up in an environment, and that's not a critique of my family, that's just the reality. It was better than what they were taught and experienced, but not quite, where my kids are at. And that's an X factor for our kids. Like they're at 18 and 20, they are more emotionally intelligent than my wife and I were at 30. And we see the advantage that's giving them, and I go, man, this is a bigger deal than I thought.
Yeah. I wonder if part of this is even just acknowledging, maybe in a sense of like an educational way, that there's even a need to be self aware. Because, like you asked, how do you become aware that you need to be self aware? Like, there's at the core of that a need. I can't think of a better word to even value self knowledge. And if you don't have a value for it, then you aren't self aware necessarily,
Or you just
which
don't
is
want to
interesting.
be. Like, I think for me early on, I just didn't want to be. I was afraid. Like, I was afraid of what I would learn about myself.
Yeah. And I don't know that I was afraid. I more just didn't, I was unaware. So part of it is the transformation process. You have to become aware to even value something. And it's a brutal process, though, too. I would say those who have watched me become self aware, and when I think it was Joe who asked, what was it that pushed you into needing to become more self aware? I was really dysregulated and upset about leaders in the church, and just was so distraught that I had to address my own emotions that I was experiencing because I was so uncomfortable. And so that's what forced, I almost, in a sense, got forced into paying attention. So there has to be some kind of, I don't know, is apocalyptic, eye opening.
Well, right. Like,
Oh, wait.
whether it's a crisis or a failure or a hurt or a trauma, I do think for most people that whether they're aware of this kind of journey or not, there is a triggering thing that doesn't do all of it, but it becomes kind of like what Gladwell would call a tipping point, right? Like this big tipping, this little thing that happens, little in the scheme of life, this little thing that happens, it becomes a big tipping point in our own kind of personal development.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Good.
I almost wonder, is there a healthier way and better way that's not so brutally painful to help people? Maybe that's part of this podcast, Marcus, is like raising awareness of, hey, you should be aware, people.
Right. That's why we make it a habit. I think that's a huge part of this idea is the more we talk about it, the more we open people up to it. And how can we have this happen with people in a way that's not so painful? It's human nature that we don't want to change until that's the only option. Right. I mean, it's true of churches. Like, we created a desperation inventory, and the more desperate a church is, the more open they are to change, right? This is like 101 human nature. Like, you look throughout the Old and New Testament, right? It's like, okay, when it gets really bad, then we might do something about it. I mean, it's the story of the Israelites, it's the story of the disciples. Like, it's the story of humanity. So I think there's something that's, I'm not suggesting it's a good idea, I'm just saying there's something natural about that.
I think like there's a couple of things that are important. I would hope that we could communicate is, what's going to break people out of that is really about who you surround yourself with in a lot of ways. Like, do you have someone who can tell you the truth in your life? And so if you're a pastor and you're listening to this and you're kind of on the fence of this, here's a good test. Like, do you have someone in your life that can actually say, "Hey, dummy, that you shouldn't do that"? If you don't, right, you need to find that person. And the
Or
other thing I
multiple.
think, yeah, yeah, the other thing I think of is those of us who have gone through the journey of transformation. We become vulnerable and transparent,
Mm.
and we share. And that's one practice that, as I've gone through my own growth in this area, that I talk about it openly, even though it's embarrassing to me still, that was the kind of human I was. Um, but I've just learned to take the power away from the secret and empower other people to take a brave step and actually begin the journey of working on it. And it takes people like us just going, yeah, I really did not do that well. And here's what I learned from it. Here's how I grew from it. Or, this happened to me. I didn't do anything, whatever, but this is how I've grown. It's like, we just talk about it. You know what I mean? Like, the more we talk about it, the more people will feel comfortable exploring it.
And I think we've got to help each other do that. So I think, my wife grew up in a family where, like, any kind of emotional knowledge or intelligence was not a thing. And so, over the last probably 5 to 10 years, she's been doing, 40 years of work in that. And it's been fascinating. But one of the questions when I react a certain way these days, she's like, what are you feeling right now? Why are you reacting the way that you're at reacting? And so just even being asked that question of why, I'm like, oh, I'm feeling angry at myself because I failed. Like, one of the things I learned about myself in the midst of parenting was that when I would get angry, it's not that I was angry at the situation or angry at the person. I was angry at myself because of something I did or didn't do, or something I did or didn't prevent. And so just to recognize that thing, it was like, it was hard and painful, and you feel awful, but at the same time, it's like, oh, this is actually about me. This has nothing to do with my child's behavior. This is all about me. And it can't be all about me. And so then, I still have those feelings, but then my reaction is, talking about, one of Jen's favorite words, regulating, right? Like, my response is much more regulated. And I can say, I'm angry because I feel like I failed here. Or I can say to someone close to me, I feel like I failed here. Something that really bothered me that happened a week ago. It's like, why is this upsetting me? Because I feel rejected. And for an Enneagram 8, that's a pretty big deal. And
Yeah.
for my personality and for my desire for community, that's a pretty big deal. So I think it's sometimes it's conversational too, even with myself.
Yeah, it doesn't help that church leadership culture is permeated with bro culture, toxic masculinity, where it's like, at least with men, where it's just like, oh, empathy, oh, that's a bad word, like, I
Oh,
don't know, it's just
politically, we
weird.
think it's a bad word. Like, it's like a sign of weakness. And it's like, actually, no, it's like a sign of Christlikeness. Empathy is a
Yeah,
sign of Christlikeness. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of being woke, whatever the hell that word means. It's not a sign of being liberal. Like, it's actually a sign of being a decent human being.
yeah.
And rant.
And
Jen smiling at us. Like,
No, I love this so much. And to me, it's a mark of maturity. Like, really, what we're talking about is maturity. Are you on the actual journey of walking with Jesus, because it's the way and it's on the road and it's the way of the road that we're journeying together. And in order to actually do that, it's an invitation to be reflective and to invite other people into that in the midst of Jesus and allow the Holy Spirit to actually transform you. Like, that's the process of being discipled. So I don't know. It's interesting. Like you said, the bro culture, it's not cool or tough. Like, you're not tough enough if you're actually participating in the thing that we say that we're here for. It's like,
Mm.
it's so fascinating. We've been deceived. I guess that's maybe what I'm pondering over here and laughing out of a place of grief. I don't know. That it's, yeah. Did we ever answer your original question?
No, but this is great. So I pulled up Romans 12 because I was thinking about this. It's like, again, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. And then it goes on, right? Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then, and I would add only then, you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. But he goes on later, like in this chapter in verse 9, it, to talk about these things, right? uh, Love must be sincere, hate what is evil, be devoted to one another, honor one another above yourself, do not repay evil for evil. Like, it's painting this picture of Christ-likeness. And I think all of this stuff, this being transformed, is at the heart of self-knowledge. That like in self-knowledge, we come to this place where we continually, through Jesus, learn about who we are and who we should be, and those parts that don't mirror Jesus and those parts that do. And I think the hardest thing about self-knowledge is, I mean, look, who likes to look in a mirror? Like, nobody likes to look in a mirror. You're looking in a mirror because you're anxious about something, or because you have to present something or be something, right? um, and I think none of us get real excited when we look in a mirror. And I think, going back to Joe's original question, what's self-knowledge? It's that process of continually looking into the mirror to see the things that you can't or don't want to see, and figure out which of those need to be transformed by Jesus.
It's good.
So I don't care
Yeah.
if we answered the original questions, right? I think we answered a lot of the questions by kind of what we were talking about. I mean, anything else you guys would say about this, or any tips you would give people from your own self-knowledge journey, whether the moments where you nailed it and the moments where you got nailed by it?
I would say when people do give you feedback, to be willing to have the maturity to receive it without being shamed. Like, there's a way to experience rebuke that's beautiful, and it's for the purpose of restoration and maturity and growth, and to help you to grow into wholeness. It's not a shame experience. It's actually part of the journey that we're being invited into, that I was referencing before, and to have value in it. So the reason that my husband, when he talks about my growth journey, that I was once doing this and now it's more like this in my growth journey, is because I've intentionally surrounded myself by people like you all, who I can't even sit at my birthday dinner and not have these like deep introspective conversations about who I am as a human, and the ways that I've screwed up, and also the ways that I am growing and into wholeness. That's just, I've intentionally put myself with people who value that, instead of just talking about sports, or not that I would talk about sports, but things that aren't as deep, I guess. So that's what I would say is value feedback and hear it and do something with it. Don't just get offended or brush it off, or like sit in it and let it steep into you and change you.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that and say, because I agree, feedback is the greatest tool for teaching is you learn from feedback. And so the hard thing is that when feedback comes that we don't want to hear, our fight or flight gut reaction comes in, and we start defending, and we start debating, and we start doing all the things to make us feel safe again, because we feel unsafe in that moment of negative feedback. So here's a good practice: is if someone comes and they're offering you negative feedback and you're feeling that ugliness in your heart and your stomach, and you begin to turn, just simply just go, hey, can I just say thank you for having the courage to tell me that? Can you give me some time to actually think through this? And can we have a conversation about it, maybe in a day or in a week or whatever that timetable, depending on what it is? But sometimes you got to give yourself space to process the information you just heard instead of feeling like you got to actually deal with it right then and there. My wife and I, when we fight, we have permission to tell each other, time out. Emotions are getting way too big right now. And so I need to move away because I'm feeling this inside of me. And if I continue down the path I'm feeling, I'm going to say something I'll regret. So I need a minute, and we do that. And so it's okay if someone comes and says, hey, pastor, A, B, and C, or hey, friend, A, B, and I didn't like this, whatever, and you're feeling something, just simply go, hey, thanks for that feedback. If you don't mind, I want to take some time to actually think about that, because I'm feeling a lot with what you said, and I'd like to come back and work through maybe some of the things that you're sharing with me. Is that okay if we do that? And leave it there. Don't feel like you have to respond in the moment. So that'd be my tip on top of
Awesome.
Jen's.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, just the one last thing I'd say about this, comes from the great philosopher and theologian Ted Lasso. Get get curious, not judgmental. And I think we apply that to other people, but I think a huge part of healthy self knowledge is actually applying that to ourselves. That a lot of times in our moments of frustration or failure or inadequacy, we kind of, talking about Jen's shame, right? We get judgmental towards ourselves instead of getting curious. How do we get curious about why do I feel the way I do? Why am I reacting the way that I'm reacting? Why is this, a thing for me? And I think those moments always lead to deeper self-knowledge. Well, awesome. This has been a really fun conversation and kind of worth the extra time and not even coming close to really kind of answering questions. I love it and appreciate you guys, and looking forward to more as we kind of continue to dive into the habits of healthy leaders.
Love it. Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for listening. Again, we encourage you to keep the conversation going, especially with these habits of healthy leaders. We're using these podcast episodes to help shape the book that we are writing about this very topic. Voices in the Wilderness is brought to you by Preparing for Amazement Ministries, where we empower and equip churches and leaders to create lasting and transformational health. Visit amazed15.org to learn more. Again, we welcome any comments or suggestions. Simply email us at podcast@amazed15.org.